In a small cafe, a millionaire is stunned to see a black server wearing his mother's ring. As they unravel this mystery, what shocking family secret will be exposed? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The morning sun casts long shadows through the windows of Café Heritage, a modest establishment nestled in the heart of New York's historic district. Lucas Thompson stood at the entrance, his tailored suit contrasting sharply with the cafe's worn wooden floors and vintage decor. The familiar chime of the bell above the door transported him back 20 years, to mornings spent watching his mother sip coffee from her favorite blue ceramic mug. The cafe remained remarkably unchanged. The same antique coffee grinder stood proudly on the counter, its brass finish dulled by years of use. The aroma of freshly ground beans mixed with the sweet scent of pastries, creating the exact fragrance that had permeated his childhood memories. Lucas noticed that even the scratches on the wooden counter remained, each mark telling its own story of countless cups served and conversations shared. Regular customers occupied their usual spots, the elderly man with his newspaper by the window, young professionals typing away on laptops, and students huddled over textbooks. The familiar symphony of coffee cups clinking against saucers, quiet conversations, and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine created an atmosphere that felt frozen in time. As Lucas made his way to the counter, his attention was drawn to a young woman serving customers with remarkable efficiency. Chloe moved with practiced grace, her movements fluid as she navigated between tables. Her genuine smile and warm interactions with customers reminded him of his mother's stories about starting as a waitress in this very cafe before meeting his father. What caught his eye, however, wasn't just her natural charm. On her right hand, as she handed a cappuccino to an elderly customer, a ring captured the morning light. The geometric Art Deco design, with its distinctive emerald center stone surrounded by tiny diamonds, was unmistakable. Lucas felt his heart skip a beat. The ring was identical to the one his mother had worn every day until her death 5 years ago. He watched Chloe work, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The ring had been a family heirloom, supposedly lost during his mother's final hospital stay. Yet here it was, or at least an identical piece, on the finger of a cafe server who couldn't be more than 25 years old. After several minutes of internal debate, Lucas approached the counter. Chloe turned to him with her characteristic smile, but before she could recite her usual greeting, he spoke. "That's an unusual ring you're wearing," he said, keeping his voice casual despite the tension he felt. "It looks remarkably similar to one I once knew." Chloe's smile faltered slightly as she glanced down at her hand. "Oh, this." She twisted the ring on her finger, a gesture that seemed both protective and nervous. "It's been in my family for generations. My grandmother gave it to me on my 18th birthday." "Do you know its history?" Lucas asked, noting how her expression shifted from surprise to curiosity. "Not entirely," Chloe admitted, her voice softening. "My grandmother said it was passed down through the women in our family, but she never knew the full story. There was always something mysterious about it." She paused, studying Lucas's face more carefully. "Why do you ask?" The cafe's morning rush had begun to thin, leaving them in a pocket of relative quiet. Lucas could see the questions forming in Chloe's mind as she observed his reaction to the ring. The resemblance to his mother's ring was too precise to be coincidence. The unique setting, the specific cut of the emerald, even the slight asymmetry in the diamond arrangement that had always been considered a charming flaw. Because, Lucas said, choosing his words carefully, "I believe that ring might be connected to my family's history as well." He watched as understanding dawned in Chloe's eyes, followed quickly by confusion and a hint of defensiveness. The morning light streaming through the cafe's windows illuminated dust motes dancing between them, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that seemed fitting for such an unlikely encounter. The familiar sounds of the cafe, the clink of cups, the murmur of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, faded into the background as they stood there, two strangers connected by a mysterious piece of jewelry that somehow bridged their separate worlds. Lucas realized that this moment, standing in the cafe of his childhood, might be the beginning of unraveling a mystery that had haunted his family for years. The ring's appearance raised countless questions. How had it found its way to Chloe's family? What connection might exist between their families? And most importantly, what secrets might this ring hold about his mother's past? The New York City Archives building stood imposingly against the afternoon sky, its stone facade a testament to the countless histories preserved within. Lucas guided Chloe through the revolving doors, his familiarity with the building evident in his confident stride. The security guard nodded in recognition as they passed. Lucas had spent many hours here researching his family's business history. The city's historical records go back to the 1800s, Lucas explained as they walked through the marble-floored corridor. If there's any connection between our families, we might find it here. He glanced at Chloe, who seemed both overwhelmed and fascinated by the building's grandeur. Her work apron was still tied around her waist. She had agreed to come during her lunch break, though Lucas suspected her manager's acquiescence had more to do with Lucas's family name than genuine flexibility. The research room smelled of old paper and wood polish. Rows of microfilm readers lined one wall, while large tables filled the center space. Lucas approached the reference desk, where an elderly librarian sat reviewing documents. "Mrs. Henderson," he greeted her warmly. "We're looking for social records from the 1920s, particularly anything about the winter charity balls." Mrs. Henderson adjusted her glasses, her eyes lingering curiously on Chloe before turning to her computer. "The Morrison-Thompson winter balls," she mused, typing efficiently. "Those were quite the events. We have several boxes of photographs and guest lists in storage." She wrote down a reference number and handed it to Lucas. "Section C, row 15. As they waited for the archives assistant to retrieve the materials, Chloe fidgeted with her ring. "I still don't understand," she said quietly. "How could our families be connected? My grandmother worked as a seamstress all her life. We've never been part of." She gestured vaguely at their surroundings, this world. Lucas considered her words carefully. "Social boundaries were different back then," he replied, "and sometimes more fluid than people today might think." Before he could elaborate, the assistant returned with 2 large boxes. The first photograph they found showed a grand ballroom decorated with crystal chandeliers and elaborate ice sculptures. Men in tuxedos and women in flowing gowns filled the space, but what caught their attention was a couple near the center. The woman wore a striking emerald ring. "That's it," Chloe breathed, holding up her hand next to the photograph. The ring in the image was unmistakably the same as the one she wore. The woman wearing it stood next to a tall man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, their body language suggesting intimacy despite the formal setting. Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he read the caption, "Elizabeth Morrison and James Thompson, Winter Charity Ball, 1925. He looked up at Chloe. "That's my grandfather, but the woman?" He paused, studying the image more closely. "That's not my grandmother." They spent the next hour sifting through photographs and documents. Each discovery added another layer to the mystery. Elizabeth Morrison appeared in several photos from that winter, always wearing the ring, always in James Thompson's company. But by the following spring's social events, she had vanished from the record. Instead, James appeared with Catherine Wells, the woman who would become Lucas's grandmother. "There's something here," Lucas said, spreading out the photos chronologically. Elizabeth Morrison attended every major social event that winter, then disappeared completely. No marriage records, no death certificate, nothing. Chloe had been unusually quiet, studying the photographs intently. "Lucas," she said suddenly, "look at this." She pointed to a small detail in one of the photos, a young woman standing in the background, wearing a servant's uniform. "That's my grandmother. She worked as a maid for the Morrison family." The revelation hung in the air between them. Lucas felt an inexplicable pull toward Chloe, a connection that went beyond their shared mystery. But his family's expectations weighed heavily on him. The Thompsons were still prominent figures in New York society, and he had responsibilities, expectations to meet. The afternoon light had faded to dusk by the time they finished examining the records. They had uncovered more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Their families' histories were intertwined in ways neither of them had imagined. As they packed away the photographs, Lucas noticed Chloe's hands shaking slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Everything I thought I knew about my family's history, it feels different now." She looked at the ring on her finger with new eyes. "What really happened between Elizabeth Morrison and your grandfather? And how did this ring end up with my grandmother?" Lucas wanted to comfort her, but he maintained a professional distance. His family's board meeting tomorrow would require his full attention. They were discussing a major merger that could affect thousands of employees. He couldn't afford to be distracted by this mystery, no matter how compelling it was becoming. Back at Café Heritage, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably since Lucas's regular appearances began. Whispers followed Chloe as she moved between tables, her co-workers' eyes tracking her interactions with the well-known billionaire. The morning rush brought not just the usual stream of customers, but also a steady undercurrent of speculation and judgment. Sarah, a fellow server who had worked alongside Chloe for 3 years, cornered her in the break room. "You need to be careful," she warned, her voice low and urgent. "Men like Lucas Thompson don't just randomly strike up friendships with cafe servers. Remember what happened to Jenny when she got involved with that hedge fund manager?" The concern in Sarah's voice was genuine, even if her words stung. Chloe methodically folded her apron, buying time before responding. The past week had been a whirlwind of discoveries and confusion. The ring on her finger, once a simple family heirloom, now felt heavier with the weight of unspoken history. "It's not like that," she finally replied. "We're just trying to understand a shared family history." But even as she spoke the words, Chloe felt their inadequacy. The suspicious glances from customers who recognized Lucas, the way her manager suddenly became overly accommodating, the unexpected appearance of gossip column photographers outside the cafe, everything had changed. Her simple life, built on hard work and genuine connections with regular customers, had become complicated by association. Lucas noticed the tension during his visits. He saw how other servers would fall silent when Chloe approached their group, how some regular customers now requested different servers. The familiar comfort of his childhood cafe was being tainted by the social dynamics he'd spent his life navigating. One morning, he arrived earlier than usual, catching Chloe as she set up for the day. "I'm sorry," he said without preamble. "I should have been more considerate about how my presence here would affect you." The morning sun hadn't yet reached the cafe's windows, and in the dim light, their reflection showed two people from seemingly different worlds. Chloe continued arranging cups with precise movements. "You don't need to apologize for existing," she responded, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "But I won't pretend it's been easy. Yesterday, a customer asked if I was planning to sell my story to the tabloids." Lucas felt the familiar weight of his family's expectations pressed down on him. Just that morning, his mother had called, her voice carefully neutral as she mentioned seeing his name in the society pages. "Lucas, darling," she'd said, "the board members are beginning to talk. Your father built this company on reputation and trust. We need to maintain certain standards." The implications were clear. The Thompsons weren't just wealthy. They were old money, with networks of influence spanning generations. His regular appearances at a modest cafe, his obvious interest in a server's family history, these things didn't align with the image his family had cultivated for over a century. "Perhaps we should continue our research more discreetly," Lucas suggested, hating himself for the words even as he spoke them. "I could arrange private meetings, away from prying eyes." Chloe finally turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of understanding and disappointment. "Making our interactions more secretive would only confirm their suspicions," she pointed out. "Besides, I'm not ashamed of trying to understand my family's history." The morning prep routine continued around them, coffee grinding, pastries being arranged, floors being swept. The familiar rhythm of the cafe preparing to open felt like a counterpoint to their tense conversation. "We should visit my family," Chloe said suddenly, surprising both of them. "My grandmother's health isn't good, but her mind is sharp. If anyone knows the truth about this ring and its connection to your family, it would be her." The suggestion hung between them, full of implications. Meeting Chloe's family would make this connection real, would take it beyond the relatively safe confines of historical research. Lucas thought about his father's upcoming retirement announcement, about the board's expectations that he would step seamlessly into the role of CEO, about the carefully orchestrated public image he'd maintained for years. When he asked, making his decision, "Sunday," Chloe replied. "Everyone gathers at my grandmother's house after church. It's nothing fancy, just family lunch and conversation." Her eyes met his, challenging him to maintain his composure at the thought of such an informal family gathering. The cafe's bell chimed as the first customer of the day entered. Chloe straightened her apron, professional mask sliding back into place. "Sunday at noon," she said quietly. "I'll text you the address. Wear something casual. Grandma Rose doesn't trust men in suits." As Lucas watched her return to work, he realized they had crossed a line. Their investigation was no longer just about historical curiosity. It had become personal, complicated by the realities of their different worlds colliding. The ring on Chloe's finger caught the morning light, its emerald seeming to hold secrets that could either bridge their worlds or destroy them both. The modest two-story house in Queens stood in stark contrast to Lucas's Upper East Side penthouse. Sunday afternoon sunlight warmed the worn brick facade as he approached, carrying a carefully selected bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers. He had followed Chloe's advice, wearing jeans and a casual button-down shirt instead of his usual tailored suits, but he couldn't completely shed the aura of wealth that surrounded him. The sounds of laughter and conversation spilled from the open windows, along with the rich aroma of home cooking. Chloe met him at the door, looking different from her cafe persona in a simple sundress. "Ready?" she asked, her expression both encouraging and slightly nervous. Before Lucas could respond, a voice called from inside. "Is that him? Bring that boy in here." The commanding tone belonged to an elderly woman seated in a well-worn armchair in the living room. Grandma Rose's keen eyes scrutinized Lucas as he entered, taking in every detail of his appearance. The room fell silent as other family members paused their conversations to observe the interaction. "Mrs. Rose," Lucas began, extending his hand. "Thank you for having me in your home." "Thompson," she said, ignoring his outstretched hand. "I knew your grandfather." The statement fell like a stone in still water, creating ripples of tension throughout the room. Chloe's cousins exchanged glances, while her mother stopped arranging dishes in the adjacent dining room to listen. Lucas carefully set down his gifts and took the seat Rose indicated. "You knew James Thompson?" he asked, maintaining his composure despite his surprise. "Knew him?" Rose's laugh held no humor. "I worked in that house for 15 years. Saw things the society pages never printed." Her eyes drifted to the ring on Chloe's finger. "That ring has quite a story behind it, young man. A story your family tried very hard to bury." Chloe's Uncle Marcus stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Mama, maybe this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," Rose interrupted. "This boy walks in here with his Thompson name and his Thompson money, thinking he can dig up our family history like it's some kind of entertaining mystery. Well, there's blood in that history, boy. There's pain." The room grew impossibly quiet. Even the children playing in the backyard seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their laughter fading to whispers. Lucas felt the weight of every eye in the room, judging him not for who he was, but for the sins of his ancestors. "The Thompsons," Rose continued, her voice dropping lower. "They built their empire on broken promises and stolen dreams. Your grandfather, James Thompson, he wasn't just some successful businessman. He was a man who knew how to take what he wanted, no matter the cost to others." Chloe moved to stand beside Lucas, her presence both protective and uncertain. "Grandma, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that ring on your finger represents more than just some long-lost romance. It represents a choice that shaped both our families." Rose's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a photo album on the side table. Elizabeth Morrison wasn't just some debutante who disappeared from society. She was a woman who dared to challenge the rules of her time. Lucas felt a creeping sense of dread as Rose slowly opened the album. The first photograph showed a younger version of herself, standing in a servant's uniform beside a beautiful woman wearing the emerald ring. They were smiling, their posture suggesting friendship rather than the typical mistress-servant relationship of the era. Elizabeth was different from the others, Rose explained, her voice softening with memory. She saw people as people, not as their social class. She and your grandfather fell in love at a time when their marriage would have been celebrated by society. But Elizabeth discovered something about the Thompson family business, something that changed everything. Lucas leaned forward, his throat dry. What did she discover? Rose's eyes met his, sharp with decades-old anger. That's not my story to tell, boy. But I will tell you. That ring didn't just disappear. It was given to me for safekeeping, along with other proof of what really happened. Elizabeth made sure the truth wouldn't die with her. The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. Lucas felt the carefully constructed narrative of his family's history beginning to crack. The prestigious Thompson name, the legacy he'd been groomed to protect, it all seemed to shift beneath his feet like sand in an hourglass. "They're letters," Rose said finally. "Letters that Elizabeth left behind. But after what happened to her, I swore I'd never let them see the light of day unless a Thompson came looking for the truth instead of trying to bury it." She studied Lucas's face intently. "The question is, boy, are you ready to learn what your family tried so hard to hide?" The letters, yellowed with age, rested in a weathered cedar box that Rose kept in her bedroom closet. After lunch, when the other family members had retreated to the backyard or living room, she beckoned Lucas and Chloe to follow her upstairs. The wooden stairs creaked beneath their feet as they ascended, each step seeming to take them further back in time. Rose's bedroom reflected decades of carefully preserved memories. Photographs lined the walls, documenting the evolution of her family through the years. She moved with deliberate purpose to the closet, retrieving the box from behind stacked quilts. The care with which she handled it spoke volumes about its significance. Elizabeth wrote these over the course of 6 months, Rose explained, settling into her reading chair. From the winter she met James Thompson to the spring when everything fell apart. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she opened the box, revealing dozens of letters bound with faded blue ribbon. The first letter, dated December 15th, 1925, began with elegant handwriting that grew increasingly urgent as the page progressed. "Dearest Rose, the annual Morrison-Thompson Winter Ball proved more eventful than any of us could have anticipated. James continues to court me publicly, and while my heart soars in his presence, I cannot shake the unease I felt when examining those ledgers in Howard's study. The numbers don't align with the public records, and the frequent mentions of special acquisitions disturb me greatly." Lucas felt his chest tighten as he read. The letter confirmed his recent suspicions about certain irregularities he discovered in the company's historical records. Chloe leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against his as she read along. The next letter, dated 3 weeks later, revealed more. "The deeper I look, the more disturbing the truth becomes. The Thompson jewelry empire wasn't built solely on James's grandfather's designs, as everyone believes. Those special acquisitions were actually stolen pieces, taken from immigrant families during customs inspections, then altered just enough to disguise their origins. The profit margins in the ledgers match perfectly with these thefts." Rose interrupted their reading. Elizabeth was an educated woman at a time when most society girls focused solely on marriage prospects. She had a mind for numbers and a strong sense of justice. When she discovered the truth about the Thompson family's early business practices, she faced an impossible choice. The letters that followed told a story of mounting tension and moral conflict. Elizabeth had confronted James about her discoveries, believing his love for her would compel him to right the historical wrongs. Instead, his reaction revealed a darker side of his character. A letter from February 1926 captured the aftermath. "Rose, my trusted friend, I fear for my safety. James was not the man I believed him to be. When I threatened to expose the truth, he revealed that his family has always known about their fortune's origins. They view it as the cost of building their empire. The emerald ring he gave me, which I once thought symbolized our love, was itself stolen from a Russian countess fleeing the revolution. I cannot bear to wear it, knowing its true history." Chloe instinctively touched the ring on her finger, its weight suddenly feeling different. "But how did it come to be in our family?" Rose carefully unfolded another letter, this one dated March 15th, 1926. Elizabeth made her choice. She couldn't live with the guilt of knowing the truth while continuing to benefit from it. But she also knew that direct confrontation would be dangerous. The Thompsons had powerful connections in both business and politics. The letter revealed Elizabeth's plan. "I've gathered copies of the most damning evidence, ledgers, correspondence, even photographs. But exposing everything would ruin countless lives, including those of innocent family members and employees. Instead, I've decided to ensure the truth remains preserved but protected. The ring, along with all the evidence, I entrust to you, my dearest friend. Keep them safe, pass them down through your family. Perhaps someday, a Thompson will appear who values truth over power, justice over privilege." Lucas sat back, his mind racing. The carefully curated history of Thompson Jewelers, the story of innovation and entrepreneurship he'd been raised on, was built on a foundation of theft and exploitation. Yet Elizabeth's words about a Thompson who valued truth over power resonated deeply with his own growing discomfort with his family's business practices. "There's more," Rose said quietly, reaching deeper into the box. "Letters that explain what happened to Elizabeth after she disappeared from society. But before I share those, you need to understand something crucial about your grandmother, Lucas. About why she really married your grandfather that spring." Later that evening, Lucas and Chloe found themselves in the small garden behind Rose's house. The Sunday gathering had thinned out, leaving them alone with their thoughts among the blooming hydrangeas and climbing roses. The weight of the afternoon's revelations hung between them like an invisible curtain. Chloe broke the silence first, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "I need to tell you something about my daily reality, Lucas. Something that goes beyond these letters and family histories." She gestured to the street beyond the garden fence, where a police car had slowed noticeably while passing Rose's house for the third time that hour. "That's not unusual for us. Being watched, being questioned, being doubted, it's part of my everyday life as a Black woman in this city." Lucas remained silent, recognizing the importance of listening rather than immediately responding. The carefully manicured world of Thompson Enterprises, with its diversity initiatives and PR-approved statements about inclusion, suddenly seemed hollow in comparison to Chloe's lived experience. "When I started working at the café," she continued, "customers would sometimes refuse to let me serve them. They'd wait for Sarah or another white server. The manager called it customer preference until I documented every incident for 3 months straight." Her fingers unconsciously twisted the emerald ring as she spoke. "I had to work twice as hard to prove myself worthy of serving coffee, Lucas." Coffee. The implications of Elizabeth's letters took on new meaning in light of Chloe's words. The systemic exploitation revealed in those century-old documents wasn't just historical fact. It was part of a continuing pattern that shaped lives today. "The board meeting tomorrow," Lucas said slowly. "We're supposed to vote on acquiring a chain of small, independent jewelers. The numbers look good on paper, but I've seen what happens after we take over. Local craftsmen get replaced by standardized production. Generations of family businesses disappear into the Thompson brand." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "I've always told myself it's just business, just the natural evolution of the market." The garden lights flickered on automatically as dusk deepened around them. Chloe turned to face Lucas directly. "You know what's interesting about serving coffee?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. "You see people at their most unguarded. The businessman who treats his employees like machinery will still snap at the barista who takes too long with his order. The socialite who chairs charitable foundations will still wrinkle her nose if my hand touches hers while passing her drink." Lucas thought about his own behavior in the cafe, how he'd initially approached Chloe with such certainty of his right to question her about the ring. "I've been raised to see everything as a transaction," he admitted. "Every relationship, every interaction, there's always an agenda, always an angle to consider. Even my mother's charity work is carefully calculated for maximum social impact." A sudden burst of laughter from inside the house carried through the open windows. Rose was telling stories to her great-grandchildren, her voice animated with the joy of family connection. The sound stood in sharp contrast to Lucas's description of his own family dynamics. "Do you want to know what scared me most about finding those letters?" Chloe asked. Not the revelation about the Thompson family's past, but the realization that Rose kept this secret her entire life. She worked in that house, served those people, knowing what they'd done. She carried that burden so her children and grandchildren could have a chance at a better life. Lucas felt the weight of his family name pressing down on him. "Tomorrow at the board meeting, I'm supposed to present a unified front with my father. The perfect heir to the Thompson legacy, ready to lead the company into a new era of expansion." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But all I can think about is Elizabeth's words about waiting for a Thompson who values truth over power." "It's not just about the past anymore, is it?" Chloe observed. "It's about who we choose to be right now, knowing what we know." The garden had grown dark enough that the emerald in Chloe's ring no longer caught the light, but its presence remained central to their conversation. The evidence hidden away in Rose's house offered them both a choice: continue the patterns of the past or find the courage to forge a different path. "My father expects me to think like a Thompson," Lucas said quietly, "to protect the family interests at all costs. But sitting here, in this garden, listening to your family's laughter, I'm starting to understand what Elizabeth saw. The cost of maintaining power isn't just financial, it's human." Chloe reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Whatever you decide tomorrow, remember this moment. Remember that you had a choice." She stood, brushing off her dress. "I should help Grandma Rose with the dishes. She may have more letters to share, but I think she's waiting to see what you do with what you already know." As Chloe walked back toward the house, Lucas remained in the garden, surrounded by the gentle perfume of Rose's flowers. Tomorrow's board meeting loomed before him, but for the first time in his life, the path of duty no longer seemed clearly marked. The weight of history, both his family's and Chloe's, demanded more from him than simple obedience to tradition. The Thompson Foundation's annual gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dender into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the ancient stone walls, while New York's elite moved through the space in designer evening where that could fund a small business. Lucas stood at the entrance, his custom tuxedo a subtle armor against the evening ahead. The board meeting earlier that day had left him raw, though none of the arriving guests would notice anything amiss in his PRA. Tice's smile. Chloe's arrival created the subtle ripple he'd anticipated. She wore a deep emerald gown that echoed the color of her ring, her natural hair styled elegantly. The dress, borrowed from a costume designer friend who worked on Broadway, fit her perfectly. Yet the whispers began immediately as she handed her coat to the attendant. "Is that the waitress?" The words carried clearly from a cluster of society women near the champagne fountain. How desperate for publicity has the Thompson family become? Lucas moved purposefully through the crowd to meet her. "You came," he said softly, noting the tension in her shoulders despite her composed expression. "I almost didn't," she admitted quietly. "After watching you on the news today, announcing the acquisition of those independent jewelers, I wasn't sure where we stood." The memory of the press conference tightened his chest. He'd delivered the carefully scripted announcement with appropriate corporate enthusiasm, but each word had felt like a betrayal of their garden conversation. The board had voted unanimously in favor of the acquisition, his single abstention noted with pointed disapproval by his father. A waiter approached with champagne, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized Chloe from the café. She accepted a glass with a gentle smile that acknowledged their shared position as service workers in different contexts. The small gesture wasn't lost on the watching crowd. "Lucas, darling." His mother's voice cut through the ambient chatter. Catherine Thompson approached with the precision of a heat-seeking missile, her silver hair perfectly styled and her diamonds catching the light. "Won't you introduce me to your friend?" The pause before the word friend carried volumes of meaning. Lucas straightened, making a decision that would reshape the evening. "Mother, this is Chloe Williams. She's not just a friend. She's helping me understand some crucial aspects of our family's history that you might find interesting." Catherine's social mask slipped for just a moment. "Family history? I wasn't aware we had any connection to." She gestured vaguely at Chloe, whose grip on her champagne glass tightened imperceptibly. "The ring she's wearing belonged to Elizabeth Morrison," Lucas continued, his voice carrying just far enough to reach nearby guests. "I believe you've come across that name in Father's old files." The color drained from Catherine's face. Around them, conversations dulled as the social elite of New York sensed developing drama. Lucas's father, Charles Thompson, detached himself from a group of board members and moved toward them with barely concealed alarm. Chloe spoke for the first time, her voice clear and steady. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this might be uncomfortable, but the truth about Elizabeth Morrison and her connection to both our families deserves to be acknowledged." Charles reached them just as Catherine's composure began to crack. "This is hardly the time or place for such discussions," he said sharply. "Lucas, you're making a scene?" "No, Father," Lucas replied, loud enough now that nearby conversations ceased entirely. "A scene is what your father made when he threatened Elizabeth Morrison into silence. A scene is what happened when your company systematically acquired jewelry from immigrant families through coercion and theft." The silence spread like a wave through the gallery. Hundreds of New York's most influential people stood frozen, glasses halfway to lips, as decades of carefully maintained reputation began to crumble. "We have proof," Chloe added quietly, but in the silence, her words carried. "Letters, ledgers, photographs, everything Elizabeth entrusted to my grandmother for safekeeping." Charles Thompson's face hardened into a mask of corporate authority. "Whatever documents you think you have are likely forgeries. Our legal team will..." "Will what?" Lucas interrupted. "Bury the truth. Again? Threaten another generation into silence." He turned to address the watching crowd directly. The Thompson jewelry empire was built on more than just talent and hard work. It was built on exploitation, on the systematic theft of cultural heritage from vulnerable immigrants. Elizabeth Morrison discovered this truth a century ago and paid a heavy price for her conscience. The emerald ring on Chloe's finger caught the light as she moved to stand beside Lucas. The gesture wasn't just about solidarity, it was a visible symbol of how the past reached into the present, demanding recognition and redemption. Several phones had emerged from clutches and pocket squares, recording the confrontation. Tomorrow's society pages would carry more than the usual photos of designer gowns and charitable donations. The carefully maintained facade of the Thompson legacy was cracking in real time, live streamed to social media by the very elite who had helped maintain it. Catherine Thompson made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Lucas, think about what you're doing. This publicity stunt will destroy everything your grandfather built." "No, Mother," Lucas replied, his voice gentler now. "What will destroy his legacy is continuing to hide the truth." Elizabeth Morrison believed that someday, a Thompson would come along who valued truth over power. "I choose to be that Thompson." The implications of his words hung in the air like smoke, changing the very atmosphere of the gala. The spotlight that had followed the Thompson family for generations now illuminated a very different story than the one they'd carefully cultivated. The New York Historical Society's main exhibition hall buzzed with anticipation 2 months after the gala. Under the working title Hidden Histories, the true story of the Thompson legacy, Lucas and Chloe had transformed the space into a powerful narrative of immigration, wealth, and redemption in early 20th century New York. Display cases held Elizabeth's letters alongside ledgers and photographs, while large panels told the stories of families whose heirlooms had been appropriated into the Thompson collection. Lucas stood before a central display featuring the emerald ring, now properly credited to its original owner, Countess Anastasia Volkov. The mounting media coverage of their exhibition had led to connections with descendants of families mentioned in Elizabeth's letters. The Volkov family's granddaughter had flown in from Paris, bringing additional photographs and documents that further validated their findings. "The Times reporter is here," Chloe said, approaching with a tablet displaying early social media reactions. The hashtag #ThompsonTruth was trending nationally, accompanied by passionate discussions about corporate responsibility and historical accountability. Are you ready? The past 2 months had transformed both their lives. Lucas had been removed from his position at Thompson Enterprises by a unanimous board vote, though his trust fund remained untouchable. Chloe had left the cafe after a wealthy patron offered to fund her return to graduate school, where she now studied historical preservation and cultural heritage law. Their relationship had deepened through their shared mission of uncovering and presenting the truth. The exhibition represented more than just historical documentation. Each display had been carefully crafted to highlight both the injustices of the past and the ongoing impact of wealth inequality. A video installation featured interviews with descendants of affected families, including Rose, who spoke powerfully about Elizabeth's courage and the burden of carrying such knowledge through the decades. Mr. Thompson, a sharp voice cut through the pre-opening buzz. An elderly man approached, leaning heavily on a cane. I'm David Kessler. Your grandfather's company took my family's menorah in 1922. It's been in your Fifth Avenue showroom ever since, labeled as European Art Nouveau, with no mention of its origins. Lucas met the man's gaze directly. Mr. Kessler, thank you for coming. We have a whole section dedicated to your family story, and we'd be honored if you'd share more of your memories with our oral history project. The interaction drew the attention of nearby journalists. Smartphones emerged to capture the moment as Lucas guided Mr. Kessler to the relevant display, where an exact replica of the menorah stood alongside documentation of its acquisition. The original remained in Thompson Enterprises' possession, though Lucas's legal team was working on restitution cases. Did you know? Mr. Kessler asked suddenly. Growing up in all that wealth, did you ever suspect where it came from? The question cut to the heart of Lucas's personal struggle. I was raised on carefully edited versions of our history, he answered honestly. It took meeting someone with the courage to question those stories to make me look deeper. He glanced at Chloe, who was explaining the significance of Elizabeth's letters to a group of university students. The exhibition had become more than just a historical revelation. It sparked intense debates about corporate responsibility and generational wealth. Some praised Lucas's decision to expose the truth, while others accused him of betraying his family legacy. Business magazines debated the impact on Thompson Enterprises stock prices, while social justice organizations called for broader investigations into other Gilded Age fortunes. Rose's contribution had been particularly powerful. Her recorded testimony provided crucial context about the social dynamics of the era, highlighting how wealth and power had been maintained through deliberate suppression of uncomfortable truths. Her description of Elizabeth's final days, which would be revealed in the exhibition's most dramatic section, promised to reshape public understanding of the Thompson family's rise to prominence. A group of high school students entered the exhibition space, part of a new educational program about ethical business practices and historical accountability. Their teacher carried copies of the exhibition workbook Chloe had developed, which challenged students to examine their own family histories and consider the complex moral questions raised by inherited privilege. The Board of Trustees is particularly impressed with how you've handled the educational component, the Historical Society's director commented, joining Lucas. This could become a model for other institutions grappling with similar histories. Yet not everyone supported their work. Outside the building, a small group of protesters carried signs defending the Thompson legacy and denouncing Lucas as a traitor to his class. Some of his former social circle had cut ties completely, viewing his actions as an unforgivable breach of unwritten rules about protecting old money reputations. But the most significant impact came from unexpected quarters. Other wealthy families, seeing the positive public response to Lucas's transparency, began examining their own histories. 2 other major New York dynasties had already approached Lucas about consulting on similar truth-telling projects. As the exhibition's opening time approached, Lucas found himself before Elizabeth Morrison's portrait. The photo showed her in the prime of life, wearing the emerald ring and a determined expression. "We did it," he whispered to the image. "We found a way to tell your story." Chloe joined him, slipping her hand into his. The ring on her finger caught the light, no longer a mystery, but a symbol of how truth, though long delayed, could still emerge to reshape the present. "Ready to open the doors?" she asked. Lucas nodded, knowing that what they were about to share would forever change how people understood not just the Thompson legacy, but the very foundations of New York's gilded history. The truth, once revealed, would never be locked away again. During a private tour of the exhibition, an unexpected visitor changed everything. Margaret Wells Thompson, Lucas's great-aunt and the family's oldest living member, arrived unannounced. Her wheelchair pushed by a private nurse, she moved through the displays with an expression that shifted between recognition and pain. When she reached the section about Elizabeth Morrison, she raised a trembling hand to stop her nurse. "I was there," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of 93 years. "The night Elizabeth disappeared. I was only 6 years old, but I remember everything." The small group surrounding her, including Lucas, Chloe, and several museum curators, fell silent. Margaret's eyes fixed on the emerald ring in its display case. "That ring wasn't just jewelry," she continued. "It was a key." Elizabeth discovered that James Thompson had created a complex system of hidden compartments in his office safe. Each piece of stolen jewelry contained a small marking that, when properly aligned, revealed the combination sequences. Lucas knelt beside his gray-tance wheelchair. In all the family gatherings, all the holiday dinners, she had never mentioned this. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked softly. "Because Elizabeth made me promise," Margaret replied. "The night she vanished, she found me hiding in the library. She was carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a plain gold band instead of the emerald ring. She told me that someday, someone would need to know the truth, but until then, silence would keep our family safe." Chloe exchanged glances with Lucas. "Our families?" she asked, emphasizing the plural. Margaret nodded slowly. Elizabeth wasn't just trying to expose the Thompson family's crimes. She was protecting her own secret, a child she had given birth to just months before, whom she had entrusted to her most loyal friend. Her gaze moved deliberately to Rose's image in the exhibition photographs. The implications hit Lucas and Chloe simultaneously. Rose hadn't just been Elizabeth's confidant. She had been entrusted with both the ring and Elizabeth's baby, Chloe's grandmother. The connection between their families wasn't just through shared history, it was through blood. "The night Elizabeth disappeared," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger with the release of long-held secrets, "James discovered that she had copied evidence of his crimes. He confronted her in his study. I heard them arguing about a child, about betrayal, about justice. When I peeked through the doorway, I saw Elizabeth holding the ring out like a weapon. She told James that she had hidden copies of all the evidence in a place he would never find, secured by the very system he had created to protect his secrets." The curator quickly brought Margaret a glass of water, but she waved it away, determined to finish her story. James lunged for the ring, but Elizabeth threw it through the study's open window. In the chaos that followed, she escaped. James spent a fortune searching for both Elizabeth and the ring, never realizing that she had orchestrated their separation specifically to protect her evidence. Lucas thought about the implications. So, when Elizabeth gave Rose the ring, she was giving her the key to everything, Margaret confirmed. The evidence, the documentation, even proof of her child's identity, all secured using James's own system. She knew he would never suspect that his stolen treasures could be used against him this way. A young researcher hurried up to their group, clutching a magnifying glass. "Mr. Thompson, Ms. Williams, we found something." Under ultraviolet light, the ring shows a series of tiny markings. They're not decorative, they're numbers. The revelations sparked immediate action. Museum conservators carefully examined the ring while Lucas cross-referenced Margaret's story with the exhibition's documented timeline. Chloe contacted Ed Rose, who revealed the existence of an old strongbox hidden in her basement, its lock mechanism surprisingly similar to the Thompson Company's early safe designs. But the most shocking discovery came from a DNA test Lucas and Chloe had taken weeks earlier, the results of which had just arrived. The report confirmed what Margaret's story suggested. Lucas and Chloe shared ancestors. Elizabeth Morrison's child, raised in secret by Rose's family, had been Chloe's grandmother. The implications extended beyond their personal connection. If Elizabeth had been pregnant with James Thompson's child when she discovered his crimes, it meant Chloe had a legal claim to part of the Thompson fortune. More importantly, it meant the very wealth and social position that had separated their families had been built on a foundation of both stolen jewelry and stolen heritage. Margaret watched the flurry of activity her revelation had sparked with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Elizabeth believed that someday, the truth would heal the wounds between our families, she said quietly. But she also warned that the full story, once revealed, would change everything. She reached for Lucas's hand. "There's more, my dear, about your grandmother Catherine, about why she really married James, and about a pact that was made the night Elizabeth vanished." The Thompson Enterprises boardroom, once a symbol of unassailable corporate power, now served as the stage for the final act of a century-old drama. Lucas stood at the head of the table, facing not only the board members, but also his father, mother, and a carefully selected group of witnesses including Rose, Chloe, and Margaret Wells Thompson. The contents of the strongbox from Rose's basement lay spread across the polished mahogany surface. "Before we begin," Lucas announced, his voice steady, "I want everyone to understand that what we're about to reveal isn't just about our family's past. It's about a choice we make today about our future." He nodded to Chloe, who began distributing copies of a document they'd discovered in the strongbox. Catherine Thompson's confession, written on her deathbed but never revealed, filled the room with heavy silence as people read. The truth about Lucas's grandmother emerged in her own words. She had been James Thompson's secretary, present the night Elizabeth disappeared. She had witnessed everything, including the real reason Elizabeth had fled. "My marriage to James Thompson," Catherine's letter read, "was not for love, but for protection. Elizabeth came to me that night with proof that James had orchestrated not just jewelry theft, but the systematic destruction of immigrant-owned businesses that refused to sell to him. She was pregnant with his child and feared for her life. We made a pact. I would marry James, using my position to protect both Elizabeth and her evidence, while she would disappear with her baby, ensuring the truth could someday come to light." Charles Thompson, Lucas's father, gripped the arms of his chair as he read about his own mother's role in the deception. The letter continued, revealing how Catherine had spent decades quietly documenting the Thompson family's continued unethical practices, adding to Elizabeth's original evidence. "The true purpose of the ring," Margaret added from her wheelchair, "wasn't just to unlock James's safe. It was meant to bring our families back together when the time was right." Catherine and Elizabeth created a trust fund, hidden within the Thompson accounts, that would activate only when their descendants discovered the truth and chose justice over power. Lucas moved to the boardroom's wall safe, the same one that had been installed in James Thompson's time. Using the numerical sequence revealed by the ring's markings, he opened it for the first time since inheriting his position. Inside lay not just jewels and documents, but a legal agreement signed by both Elizabeth and Catherine. "He agreement stipulates," Chloe explained, standing to address the room, "that when the truth was finally revealed, the Thompson fortune would be used to establish a foundation dedicated to identifying and restoring stolen cultural artifacts to their rightful owners. The foundation would be jointly managed by both families, combining the Thompson resources with the moral compass Elizabeth and Catherine fought to preserve." The implications stunned the board members. This wasn't just about acknowledging past wrongs. It was about fundamentally transforming the company's future. The agreement had been legally binding from the moment it was signed, merely waiting for the conditions of truth and reconciliation to be met. "My mother," Charles Thompson said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion, "she never told me. All those years of strict upbringing, of insisting I maintain the family's reputation, she was protecting me, wasn't she? Protecting all of us until the right time came." Catherine Thompson, who had been silently weeping as she read Catherine's confession, looked up at Chloe with new understanding. "You have her eyes," she said softly. "Elizabeth's eyes. All this time, we've been fighting against our own family." The revelation of Chloe's true heritage, as both Elizabeth's great-granddaughter and the rightful heir to half the Thompson fortune, transformed the dynamic in the room. The very wealth and privilege that had separated their families now had to serve as a tool for healing and restoration. Lucas withdrew a final document from his briefcase. "This is our chance to make things right," he said. "I've drawn up a proposal for restructuring Thompson Enterprises into the Morrison Thompson Foundation for Cultural Heritage Restoration. The company's resources will be dedicated to identifying and returning stolen artifacts, supporting immigrant-owned businesses, and promoting ethical practices in the jewelry industry." Rose, who had remained quiet throughout the revelations, finally spoke. "Elizabeth and Catherine didn't just leave us evidence of past wrongs," she said. "They left us a blueprint for redemption. They believed that someday, their descendants would have the courage to choose truth over power, love over privilege, justice over wealth." The board members exchanged glances, aware that their positions and the company's future hung in the balance. But the weight of evidence, combined with the legal authority of the original agreement, left them little choice but to adapt to the new reality. The ring, Chloe concluded, touching the emerald that had started their journey, was never just a piece of jewelry. It was a key to unlock the truth, a symbol of resistance against injustice, and ultimately, a bridge between divided families. Elizabeth and Catherine created a path for us to follow, trusting that someday we would be brave enough to walk it. As the boardroom erupted into discussions about implementing the transformation, Lucas and Chloe shared a quiet moment by the window. Below them, New York City stretched out, its streets filled with people whose lives would be touched by the changes they were setting in motion. "They planned it all," Lucas said wonderingly. "A century ago, they knew this day would come. They knew their descendants would choose love over fear," Chloe corrected him. "Just like we did." The emerald ring caught the sunlight, its hidden markings now a visible reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are planted like seeds, waiting for future generations to help them bloom into justice.